If you told me 5 years ago that one of the best chapters of my life would happen while I was living on about $1,800 a month, I would have told you that you'd lost your damn mind. Because I spent most of my life believing what most people believe. You work, you make money, you buy a better house, you get a better vehicle, and you collect more stuff, and you move up. And somewhere out there, after you've worked hard enough and accumulated enough, you're finally supposed to reach this place where life feels good. Except I did a lot of that, and life didn't feel good. Well, didn't always feel good. But then at 51 years old, everything fell apart. I walked away from the house, I walked away from my marriage, and I walked away from literally everything that I'd owned my entire life because that marriage was destroying me. And for a while, I lived in my pickup truck, and then I lived in a cheap camper, and eventually I ended up on a little piece of land in an old single wide trailer. And none of that happened because I had some grand plan to simplify my life. I wasn't trying to become a minimalist. I wasn't chasing, some internet version of freedom. I was broke. I was rebuilding. I was trying to figure out what the hell even came next. And somewhere during all of that, I accidentally escaped the rat race or the hamster wheel or whatever words you want to put with it. I didn't even realize that I'd escaped it at first. Because when you're in survival mode, you don't stand around admiring the scenery. You're worried about tomorrow. Where am I going to live? How am I going to pay for this? How do I even rebuild from here? But eventually, things settled down enough that I started noticing something. My life had gotten smaller, but it had also gotten quieter and somehow better. I didn't have the big house anymore. And I didn't have all the things that went with it. Didn't have nearly the income that I'd had during different parts of my life. But I also, I didn't wake up every morning feeling like I had to run faster just to keep everything from falling apart. And that's when something big hit me. A lot of the things that I'd spent my life trying to afford were the exact things that kept me from having the life I wanted. And that's a hard thing to admit because when you spend decades chasing something, you don't want to find out that you are chasing the wrong damn thing. Now, before somebody misunderstands me, because people do, I'm not saying money doesn't matter. That's nonsense. Money matters. I'd love to make more money. I want to build things. I want to travel. I want to help my kids. I want security. I want options. Hell, I'd love for this YouTube channel to become far bigger than it is today. But it's not about any of that. I'm not allergic to money. What changed is what I'm willing to trade for it. Because there's a big difference between having money and building a life that requires you to constantly sacrifice yourself just to maintain it. And that's what I didn't understand before. The rat race isn't necessarily having a job. There's nothing wrong with working. I've worked my whole life. But the rat race is when your lifestyle gets so expensive and so complicated and so dependent on your constant effort that you no longer have the option to stop running. The house needs you to run. The car payments need you to run. The credit cards need you to run. The lifestyle needs you to run. And the expectations need you to run. And every time that you make a little more money, somehow you find another way to spend it. Of course, I'm not saying everybody. There's somebody watching this right now that goes, not me, I have $1 million in the bank. Good for you. You did it right. But anyways, so you need another raise, another promotion, more overtime, another 5 years. And the finish line keeps moving. You know, that's the part nobody really tells you when you're young. We're taught how to increase our income. We're not taught um, how dangerous it is or can be to increase our needs right along with it. Because if you make $50,000 a year and you need 55,000 just to survive, you're trapped. And if you make 150,000 a year and you've built a life that requires 160,000, well, you're still trapped. You just have nicer shit. But that realization changed the way I look at money completely. Because right now, my basic life costs me somewhere around $1,800 a month. So to be honest, that's what I shoot for to make. And, of course I'd like more, but I'm not going to sell my soul for it. But that doesn't mean everybody can do that $1,800 a month. It doesn't mean you should. Hell, depending on where you live, you might spend that much on rent alone. But that's not the point. My point is that my number got smaller. And when my number got smaller, my freedom got bigger. That was something I never expected. The strangest part is that if I had seen this life years ago, I probably would have looked at it completely different. Old single wide trailer, 10 acres out in the country, not a whole lot of money coming in. I might have looked at that and thought, man, that guy really needs to get his shit together. But now I'm the guy and I'm sitting here. Now I am the guy, I guess. And I'm sitting here thinking, you have no idea what I've got. Because I can wake up and decide I want to go sit by a river. I can load some food in the truck and disappear in the woods for a day or two, or I can go to the lake for 4, even if it was planned for 1. I can work on this channel. I can spend time with people I care about. I can sit outside with my old fat-headed dog and do absolutely nothing for an hour or all day long without feeling guilty, because I should be somewhere else making someone else money. None of that shows up on bank statements, but it damn sure has value. And that's probably the biggest thing that I've ever learned. Not everything valuable has a price tag attached to it. I used to think freedom was something that you bought after you made enough money. Now I think freedom has a lot more to do with how much control you have over your own life. And those are not the same thing. Somebody can have $1 million and absolutely no control over their time. And somebody else can have very little money and own almost every hour of their life. Neither one is automatically better. But I know which one matters, more to me now. My time, my peace, my ability to choose. Because once you gain control over your own life, it's damn hard to hand it back. And that's why I don't think I can ever go back to the way I lived before. Could I live in another nice house someday? Absolutely. Could I make more money? Well, I hope I do. Could I buy nicer things? Sure. But I will never again build a life where those things own me. That's the difference. If I make more money now, I don't want to use it to build a more expensive prison. I want it to create more choices and keep me free of that prison. That's completely different from the way I used to think. You know, I, and I probably had to lose everything before I could understand that. You know, because I don't know if I would have voluntarily stepped away. That's the crazy part. I didn't escape the rat race because I figured life out. I got thrown out of the damn thing. Life said, you're done. And at that time, well, I thought I'd lost. I thought everything I built had disappeared. I thought I was starting over from nothing. But when I look back now, some of those things that I lost were probably the very things I needed to lose before I could see what my life had actually become. And I'm not trying to romanticize hardship. You know, there were parts of that period that absolutely sucked. Living in my truck was not some spiritual adventure. I promise you that. I don't recommend it. Being broke isn't fun. Not knowing what's coming next isn't peaceful. I wouldn't wish the worst parts of it on anybody, but something good came out of it. It forced me to separate two things I'd always treated as the same: what I needed and what I've been told I was supposed to want. Those are not the same thing. And once you figure that out, life starts looking very differently. You know, you start asking better questions. Do I actually want this? Or do I want people to see me having it? Does this improve my life? Or does it just increase what my life costs? Am I working towards something I care about? Or am I just running because I've been running so long that I forgot I could stop? Those questions would have made me uncomfortable years ago. Now I think they're some of the most important questions a person could ask. I've lived the other way. I've made good money. I've had the house. I've had the things. I've worked long hours. I've chased the next thing. And now I've lived this way too. Smaller, cheaper, slower. And if you ask me which chapter has taught me more about actually living a life worth living, it isn't even close. This one, the chapter that started when everything went wrong, chapter I never would have chosen, the chapter where I had less money, less stuff, and no clue what the hell I was doing. Somehow, that became the chapter where I finally understood what enough feels like. And maybe that's what I've been chasing my whole life without knowing it. Not wealth, not stuff, not some finish line. Enough. Enough money to live, enough room to breathe, and enough control over my own time. Enough peace that I don't need to escape from my life. I still want to grow. I'm still building. I'm still trying new things. I've got no intention of sitting here and doing nothing for the rest of my life, but I'm never going to confuse more with better again. Because I spent most of my life trying to make enough money so that one day I could finally have some freedom. Then I lost almost everything and discovered that freedom was hiding underneath all the shit I thought I needed. I didn't plan it. I sure as hell didn't see it coming. But somehow I accidentally escaped the rat race. And now that I know what it feels like, on the outside of it, I can't go back. Y'all, it's food for thought. Do with it what you will. And I'll see you in the next one.